tell Miles where he'll probably,
he's already on it.
He's already doing it, okay.
Great.
All right. And so, yeah.
And am I good to move around a little bit? Am I good to move around a little bit if I have props? Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
He'll follow you or what have you. So.
Okay, well, we will get started now that it is 6:30. Welcome to Cranes of the World. My name is Jennifer Drana. I'm the Conservation Education Director for the International Crane Foundation. Just out of curiosity, have any of you been to visit us? A few of you love it. So our headquarters is actually in Baraboo, Wisconsin, so about an hour from here. But we have staff around the world. So at this point, we have about 170 staff located across many, many countries. We have 9 physical offices. We are the most quickly growing in Africa at the moment. But while we're headquarters here, we do truly have a global reach. At our headquarters, it is the only place in the world that you, as a guest, can view all 15 species of crane, which is a very unique setup. And you can see that at our Crane Discovery Center, which is an AZA accredited zoo. So if you haven't been, I highly recommend it, or if it's been a few years, we have undergone a renovation that opened in 2020 to really expand all of the birds' habitats and give them private wetlands and be able to showcase all of those natural behaviors. So the plan for tonight is I'm going to introduce you to the Crane Foundation. We're going to go through all 15 species of crane, and then I'll highlight just a couple of the projects that we are currently working at around the world. If you do have questions along the way, let me know, and I do have some fun props as well. So with that, these are our founders. This is Ron Sowie and George Archibald. And some of you might be wondering why the International Crane Foundation is headquartered in Wisconsin. It's one of the questions we get all the time. Ron Sowie actually is from Baraboo. So he grew up in Baraboo, and Ron met George at Cornell University when they were both in grad school working on cranes for their PhD. The story goes that George overheard Ron talking about Baraboo, and he got very excited because it is where Aldo Leopold is from. And he wanted to go to Wisconsin with Ron to see the shack and the oak and that famous property. And so kind of from that conversation, a lifelong friendship was born. George Archibald is still alive. He is currently in Asia traveling for the International Crane Foundation. He turned 80 this year and is still super active with the company. And attends our staff meetings and stuff and is just a great guy. And they really kind of launched this with a lot of creative thinking, a lot of aspirations, and just wanting to save cranes from around the world. So today, like I said, we do have staff globally. We operate pretty much everywhere that there are cranes, which are on 5 continents. So Africa, Asia, Europe, Australia, and North America. And we do that with the heavy support of our other nonprofit partners, as well as state and federal governments, to make all of these projects work. And so that's just a few of the cranes from around the world. There are actually 15 species of crane, 10 of which are currently listed as threatened or endangered. So they are one of the most threatened families of birds, and that's really because they're big, they're very dynamic, and they like a lot of the same habitats that we as humans like. And so kind of there's several reasons that they're on the decline, but those are some of the major ones. If you have not spent a lot of time on our website, I do recommend this page. So right when you go to savingcranes.org, there's a lovely landing page, and it will take you to this World of Cranes map, and it will show you the ranges of all the cranes of the world. It'll also show you where we have staff or active projects, so you can scroll the globe and get a really good idea of the different things that are happening in the crane world. So, to start, what makes a crane? Got to start with the basics. So crane biology, this is one of the longest lived bird families in the world. In the wild, cranes that fledge and kind of reach that first year of life, we would anticipate that they would live 20 to 30 years. In human care, we can roughly double that. So there's a number of the birds that live at the Crane Foundation that are in their 40s and 50s. The longevity record for a crane was actually a Siberian crane named Wolf. He survived at a zoo in Europe he survived both world wars and lived into his 80s. So very long-lived. If they can kind of survive that first year or two, birds have very high initial mortality, but then are typically long-lived. Most cranes have red somewhere on their body, and of course, if you're familiar with that sandhill, they all have that lovely red patch on their head. They are vocal. I know here in Wisconsin, one of my favorite sounds in the spring is when you hear that first sandhill crane call. It just brings a smile to my face. The North American species, their tracheas, or their vocal, is quite long, and it kind of folds in their body like a French horn. That's why they have such a unique call. Other species around the world have a much shorter trachea, so they sound more like a goose honking than the beautiful vocals that we're more familiar with here. But you'll hear them all the time. They're constantly chattering and unison calling and making noise. So in the spring, they will build a nest, and most of the cranes will lay 2 eggs. So I do have a replica egg here. This is a replica whooping crane egg, so this is roughly what that chick will start out as. Mom or dad take turns incubating for approximately 1 month. I'm saying approximately because within the species there's a little variation, but I can pass this around so that you can get an idea of what they start out as. After 1 month of incubation, those little cranes will hatch out, and they grow really, really fast. Cranes can grow up to 1 inch a day, so they are fully grown by the time they are about 4 to 5 months old. They are fully grown before they can fly. And so they kind of fledge right around that 5-month mark, but they don't reach maturity for most species until they're 4 or 5 years old. So that's when that crane is ready to have a family of its own. Most lay 1 to 2 eggs, but they will be lucky to raise a single chick. Like I said, there's very high initial mortality, and that's for many reasons. Predation is one of the biggest threats with these birds, particularly when they're either just hatched or still in the egg. Predators like raccoons or coyotes can get into that nest and cause disturbance. As they start to get older, then the human factors start to be present. That might be running into power lines, or in certain parts of the world, hunting, or the pet trade. And so if they can get 1 chick to fledge, it's a good year. Oh, yes? When do they make their nests? Where? So these cranes, well, all cranes need 2 types of habitat. They need wetlands and they need grasslands. And so the wetland is where they love to build their nest. Most species will build it in the shallows of the wetland, and it's not a perfect nests like we all associate birds with building. They kind of move and build like a stack of tall grasses with a little nest bowl, and that's where they lay the eggs. But they put it in the wetland so that if a raccoon tries to get in, they have to walk through the water, and that splashing noise alerts the adult that there is a threat nearby and they need to protect the nest. There are a few species that are more grassland dependent, but kind of a similar nest structure. They're just using drier grasses to kind of build that nest bowl. But our native species are in wetlands. Our native species use the grasslands very heavily for feeding areas. And then, yeah, you had a question over here? Same thing. Oh, I love it. Okay, that was convenient. So the nest or pair bonding season really starts with the dancing. So this is another thing that really just makes humans love cranes, is they have these very fun, dynamic dancing and different body postures and ways of communicating. And typically you'll see a pair do a lot of this dancing. They'll be tossing sticks up in the air, doing the unison calling or both calling at the same time, and talking to each other. This is all just kind of that dating and courtship ritual right before they go ahead and build that nest. We do say that cranes mate for life. So typically, if you are lucky enough to have a crane pair in your neighborhood and they've successfully raised a family, chances are it'll be the same two birds that are returning year after year, raising the next set of chicks. If one crane passes away, they will repair. And just like in humans, sometimes the relationship is no longer working out and they might go find a new partner. But all of the research that we've done suggests that cranes have very high fidelity to each other. Any questions kind of in general? Yeah.
I noticed on the left that video, right at the end, a third very large.
Yeah.
I wonder what happened.
Yeah, so that's on the wintering grounds, or kind of in an area that we would call a staging area. So typically, if the weather's not super great and it's that early spring, you'll see cranes group up in kind of larger flocks. So they're near their mate, they're still doing their dancings, establishing their pair bonds, but chances are there's a lot more cranes in the field with them, hanging out. A little bit of safety in numbers. Here in Wisconsin, our big flocks form in the fall. So typically in November, we'll see some really good groups of birds. The famous flocking or staging is in Nebraska. So on the Platte River, there's a 60-mile stretch of river that most years you'll see over 500,000 sandhill cranes hanging out. Spectacular if you ever have the chance to go. It is just incredible. My family's not necessarily birders, but they went with me one year and just were blown away as well. And so then you'll see, yeah, if one pair starts dancing, then kind of it popcorns across the whole group of them, which is, again, just fantastic.
What's that big animal there? Buffalo?
Yep. So there's a few state parks and refuges that have them in the area. Kind of the classic before human came in and really changed the landscape, that's what you would have seen, is them using the grasslands together. Okay, so we're going to do a very quick around the world of the cranes. We're going to start in Africa. So there are 4 species in Africa year-round. We have the black-crowned crane, and you can see they're stretched across northern Africa there. They are known because the lovely head feathers and the black body. Similar is the gray-crowned crane. However, this one is in the southern part of the continent. The blue crane, this is the only crane without red on their body. This is the national bird of South Africa, so almost the entire population is found in that country. And then we have the wattled crane. This is the tallest of the African species. It is known because it has the wattles underneath its beak. The species, you can tell there is some overlap of range. So in Africa, there might be times where you're able to see more than one type of crane in an area. And for the most part, though, in Africa, you're only going to see one at a time. So the wattled crane is the most aquatic of all of the African species as well. So you're going to find them really close to a lot of those seasonal wetlands, particularly in the Kafue Flats. The Kafue Flats is where the bulk of the population for the wattled crane resides. One interesting thing about the African cranes is that two of them have a different adaptation than the rest of them. This is a replica crane leg. And for the cranes, they all have 4 toes. This rear toe, though, on 13 of the 15 species doesn't bend, or the joint doesn't move. So that means that 13 of the 15 species of crane cannot perch in trees. The 2 crowned cranes, their rear toe does, so you might actually see them perched up in trees on occasion. But here in North America, long-necked bird in a tree, not a crane. So you can pass that around. Cranes and birds in general are walking around on their tiptoes all day. So that first joint that you see is their ankle joint. Their joints go the same way as ours. The knee is further up, and then the hip. Their bones are just in different proportions than ours. Yeah?
So that little chick down there is a wattled crane chick?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
They better take pictures.
Yeah. So they're just like adorable fuzzballs, and like I said, they can grow an inch a day and shoot up. So very rapid growth. The cranes can start moving right away. So shortly after hatch, you'll see the little chicks actually following mom and dad around. Mom and dad will catch food and offer it to the chick right away, and that's how they learn to feed. It's not like songbirds that kind of sit in the nest and mom and dad bring everything back. They're out in the field exploring with their parents. In Africa, one kind of fun story is this year we actually, for the first time, had a hybrid of a blue and a wattled. So this crane species bred with this crane species. And our researchers in Africa are kind of trying to keep an eye on it the best they are able to. But cranes are very rarely hybridize. And so there's a lot of questions around that offspring and kind of what its future will look like. But that was actually just this breeding season that we discovered that. So our staff was pretty intrigued by that. Yes, and if you Google that, it'll pop up. There's been some publications on it already. Crane wattled blue hybrid, and it should pop up. Yeah. Or if you come talk to me afterwards, I can pull it up too. So my laptop's not on internet right now, or I would. So yeah, like I said, 4 species are in Africa. They're typically only going to move a little bit, like short, based on seasonal rains and wetland height. Nothing close to the migration that our native species go through. Up next is my personal favorite, the Barolga. The Barolga is the Australian crane. So it is found across Australia and Papua New Guinea. This is a crane that is doing quite well. It's not a crane species that we're concerned about. And they're really unique in that they nest during the hot part of the Australian year. And so their eggs are actually almost entirely white to reflect heat. And their parents typically don't incubate or sit on the eggs the way that our birds do. The Barolga is more likely to stand over the egg to shade it to keep it cool. So adapting to the habitat, right? Additionally, if you look at it, has a lot of coastline in its range. So these birds will frequent brackish habitat, which is that habitat between freshwater and saltwater. So they'll ingest a lot more salt in their day-to-day than other species might. So they actually have a special gland near their beak that helps them get rid of extra salt that they might bring in, because too much salt is bad. The Saris crane, you'll see that it overlaps a little bit with the Barolga. It's also in Australia, but it is also found in India, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam. This happens to be the tallest flying bird in the world, and it measures in at 6 feet. So you can imagine that it's quite an intimidating bird if you were to come across one in the wild. The red head that you see is actually not feathers on these birds. The red is skin. There's often a few other like black feathers layered over that, but it's skin. And then you'll see right behind the eye, right here, there's a little gray circle. That gray is feathers, and that's covering the ear hole. Birds don't have the big flaps, the big pinna that we have, so they have to protect their ear a different way. So they have great hearing, just roughly the same as yours or mine, and they just protect their ear a little bit differently. And then moving further up into Asia, we have the black-necked crane. So here you can see they are found in China and Bhutan. And there are some amazing festivals in Bhutan every spring that celebrate the return of the black-necked crane. Kids dress up as the black-necked crane and dance and kind of do a whole community celebration. Like many crane species, there's a lot of cultural connections to the communities where they're found. So that is one thing that all these species have in common. And there's a lot of celebrations around the world related to the return of a crane species to an area.
When you say return, where did they go?
Yeah, so this particular crane is going to do wintering ranges in orange, and then their breeding ranges in green. So their migration is pretty decent, but they still stay in Asia for their entire year. Yes. Yeah, that's a great observation, and you'll notice that across all the range maps, is that these species, their breeding grounds, or where they're raising their families, tend to be quite spread out, and that green is really prominent on a lot of the maps. And then they'll have a smaller orange area. That's where they are wintering. So when you're breeding, you want to have enough space and food availability to successfully raise a chick. So you just require more space when you're trying to have a family. When you're wintering and your chick is more or less self-sufficient and kind of you and your partner can spread out and kind of do whatever, you're able to just not be you don't need as much space for one individual, basically. And that's an important observation as we get to one of the other species. So you can see they still have a pretty good wintering range. It's still pretty spread out. The dots are smaller, but there's pockets across. The demoiselle, so you can see that they actually start to cross some of those bigger bodies of water. They don't go directly over, they follow the land mass. But the demoiselle crane is our smallest crane species, and they migrate over the Himalaya mountains. So small but mighty. They weigh in at about 5 pounds, and they're about 3 feet or so in height. So like all birds, they are built to be able to fly, and they are lightweight despite their size. So this crane, I think, kind of looks like an old man with those wispy white head feathers, and they're kind of just small and whatnot. And I was recently talking to a colleague from Mongolia, and she told me that in her native language, the name for the demoiselle crane does not sound as pretty. And she didn't tell me what it was, but she told me that it translates directly to grandpa crane, and it just made my day. So that's one of my favorite fun facts right now about this crane, because if you've seen them in person, it fits. And this crane, like I said, the others, that red eye is its red spot. Eurasian crane, you can see here a huge population. They are basically the equivalent of the sandhill over in Europe and Asia. So very common, very adaptable to many different habitats and temperatures. And you can see they too actually will cross over onto the African continent for the winter season. Hooded crane, we're over in the Mongolia, Russia area, and the Koreas for their habitat. They're kind of a middle-sized crane, 3.5, 4 feet tall. Again, a pretty generalist. The red crown crane, this is also known as the Japanese crane. So if you've ever seen artwork come out of Japan, it is this crane that they are featuring. They are also found in the Koreas and China, as well as Russia. So if you've heard the fable or the tale of the 1,000 paper cranes, it is this species that they are talking about. The Siberian crane, so this is where that wintering range I want to go back to. So the Siberian crane is the most endangered of all crane species. It is critically endangered. And so you can see here that this is their single wintering spot. Their breeding grounds are a little bit more spread out, but almost the entire population winters at a single lake in China. The population today stands at 5,000 to 7,000 birds, and it's trending in an upward direction, the last census that we did, which is great. But anytime you have almost the entire population of an animal seasonally combine into a single flock, that makes scientists nervous. If anything happened to that lake in terms of water quality or drought, or if a disease got into that flock, it could be devastating. So this is the bird that we consider critically endangered. Yeah.
Are cranes susceptible to avian flu?
Great question. Are cranes susceptible to avian flu? Yes. And we have actually been tracking avian influenza outbreaks around the world through the crane flocks. So it's kind of staggered. We don't see it across all continents spiking the same year. It's kind of been a slow roll. So the answer is yes. Last year, we had the first known death of a whooping crane due to avian influenza. It happened to be a bird that we released here in Wisconsin. And so that was the first positive. And then after that, there was several in Canada that tested positive as well. Currently, we believe that it's quite fatal. But we're doing some research and like sample collection to determine kind of what that actually looks like at a population level. There's been some pretty sizable die-offs of other species, including the sandhill and the Eurasian over the last few years. So it's definitely something we're monitoring. The current outbreak is in Australia. And so that's unfortunately something that is now in the environment. It's going to be something that we're going to be dealing with going forward, and we just hope that for the most part it stays away from cranes. Typically, avian influenza is spread by waterfowl, and so the cranes share a lot of similar habitats with the ducks, right? And so we kind of are able to monitor it that way. Yeah?
How is this crane being protected since it only winters in that teeny spot?
Yeah. Ask me that in a bit. That's one of the highlighted projects. Yep. Okay. And did you have a question or over here? Okay, cool. Yep. Yeah, so they're one of the more migratory species. And you can see they're going across a lot of borders. So that's another thing with these birds in our work is they're crossing a lot of international borders, and the laws from country to country and the protections that these birds have vary greatly. And so that's why we try to work closely with communities and the governments whenever possible with our projects. The white-naped crane, so kind of, again, staying over in that Asia area. They get their name from that white back of the neck, that back white nape. And again, great shot of that ear that you can see. Okay, so then we have our two, that's 13 of the 15. We have our two native species now. We have the sandhill crane. This is by far the most common of the crane species. There's million plus of them. They are doing well. That, of course, wasn't always the case. At one point, their population was quite reduced, and we are worried, but through a lot of land management and population management, they came back stellar. And then we have this crane. This is the rarest crane in the world. So here in North America, we have the most abundant and the rarest. So the whooping crane If you are not familiar with their story, about 100 years ago, the population hit the low point, and that population that remained was the one that runs from northern Canada down into Texas. The population got down to, we believe, 14 to 21 birds. And so it was through a lot of creative thinking, a lot of partnership, trial and error, land protections, Endangered Species Act, kind of all of these things working together. ICF was a big part of this. But we have gotten the population today to just over 850. And so we've come a long ways. Here in Wisconsin is the reintroduced population that runs from Horicon and Necedah Wildlife Refuge down into the southern part of the United States. I'll talk more about that reintroduction and how some of the ways we were able to increase that population. So even though there's only about 850 of them, it is spread out across 4 populations. So that's why this crane, even though the numbers are low, is classified as endangered. The Siberian crane, there's a lot more of them, but 1 population. So that's the difference in those classifications. So that is the very quick 15 species from around the world. I would like to highlight a few of the projects that ICF is doing, unless you have questions. No, okay. So the Siberian crane. So this is a group of adults, and then the cinnamon colored one is the juvenile. So that one's less than a year old. And you can see that they are standing in a wetland. They are quite aquatic. With the cranes, you can tell if they prefer to spend more of their day in the water or in the grasslands based on their beak length. So the Siberian crane, compared to their body, has a very long beak. They're more aquatic. And they are bright white, and they have those beautiful black wingtips. And they are critically endangered, in part because the wetlands are some of the first habitats that humans go in and alter. So if they don't have that great wetland habitat, particularly for their nesting season, that's going to impact how well they are able to maintain their population. So habitat loss and disturbance is a big thing for these birds. Climate change, we're starting to see a lot more seasonal drought along that main lake where they winter. So that's another thing that we're keeping a close eye on. So in China, and I'll go to a map on the next slide, we are currently doing a lot of habitat monitoring and restoration. And we've started a program known as Crane School. And so we start education near this critical habitat in the elementary school age classrooms. And so our Chinese team actually goes in, works with teachers, does professional development. There's a whole curriculum centered around these birds. And they actually take over a classroom. They take over a room like this and put all the crane stuff up with the posters and the props and all the different things. And the kids are able to learn all about them and share that information with their friends and family. And it's turning to be quite a successful program for us, and the kids look forward to it. And we have a lot of schools asking for us to come in because cranes in China are also, it's a very good species to have in your neighborhood, and people have a lot of pride if they are able to have cranes in their neighborhood. So culturally significant. So Poyang Lake is the lake that I'm talking about in China, and it's more than 95% of the population of the known Siberian cranes that come into this single lake. And in 2022, we did begin a monitoring program with local partners, doing surveys and continuing to monitor how well those lake conditions are maintaining related to this species. So in addition to drought, there's also non-native species that have found the lake, and so that's changing the food availability for these birds. And then tourism. It's a very major location in China, and anytime you get a lot of human movement in an area, that can also change the dynamic of a lakeshore or a water body. So kind of all of that together, we're doing a lot of intensive monitoring and making long-term plans of what active conservation could look like for that lake. So working with the government and our Chinese staff to do this. And you'll notice that that's kind of a common thread with our programs. We do community-based conservation. So when we go into these communities, it's not Americans going in to a community. We're hiring local researchers that can build those local connections and understand the culture. We're only going to be successful if those communities are part of the solution. So conservation sometimes looks different depending on where we are around the globe. Any questions on the Siberian? Okay. So gray-crowned crane. This is, of course, I know a lot of people's favorite species because of those crazy head feathers. We just adore how they look. So this is a crane that is classified as endangered, and it is, like many cranes, experiencing habitat loss and disturbance. And in Africa, there is some illegal hunting and pet trade happening. And so ICF in action, we're looking at a lot of habitat restoration and a lot of education. So I actually have started meeting with our educators from around the world and talking about our approach within different communities and how successful we are. And a lot of our African educators are going in and are starting after-school conservation clubs and getting kids in the outdoors, making observations in their science journals, and following cranes through their breeding season. And so they're really becoming protective of the crane species in their neighborhood and the crane pairs, and spreading that to their neighbors, which is fantastic. They also, sports is a very good way to connect with the community. So they'll show up at the local soccer competitions and talk about cranes and point them out. And the kids that are in those after-school programs will bring their adults over to be able to share the information that they've learned. And so by, again, building that community awareness, oftentimes starting with the youth, we're starting to see some positive signs in these communities. And sometimes it's just these cranes are sharing the same areas that we as humans need for our survival. So they're sharing the same clean water sources, or there's spaces that the grasslands are found. They're also the same great spaces where we want to farm. And so how do you find those balances of meeting the community's needs with the crane needs? So we've gotten creative. So in some communities, we're going to help install water tanks so that they can collect rainwater and have a clean water source, and be less reliant on the wetlands or disturbing the nesting of those birds in those wetlands. Napier grass, one of the communities, it was through observation, they noticed that people were going into the wetlands and harvesting grasses. Well, those were the same wetlands these cranes were nesting, and when those harvests occurred, the cranes abandoned nest. So instead of raising 1 chick a year, we are getting 0 chicks a year. Well, our scientists were able to talk to the people that were harvesting the grasses, and they're like, well, what are you using the grasses for? They were weaving sleeping mats. So in some communities, the conservation solution is giving away mattresses. If they have a nice place to sleep, they'll leave the wetland alone seasonally so we can get some baby cranes and get that population to slowly rebound. So definitely thinking outside of the box. And again, if you get that community buy-in, that government buy-in, you're more likely to have long-term success. And then our whooping crane. So this is probably the program that we are most famous for, we are most well known for, and is the most traditional of the conservation projects that we have going on. So the whooping crane is the largest flying bird in North America, a little bit over 5 feet. It's the rarest crane in the world, which I already mentioned. And it really declined due to habitat loss and hunting. Today, we are doing a lot of breeding with this program and reintroduction. So I mentioned this a little bit already, but this is the historic range on this side. And about 100 years ago, much of the population was wiped out. There are a lot of pressures on the birds for a variety of reasons, but the remaining population was this one. So that 14 to 21 birds was in this western population. Fast forward to the early 2000s, we had been trying for a number of years to actually be able to hatch cranes, raise them, and release them. And so in 2001, we did the first year of captive bred chicks that we released to the wild in an experimental population that runs from central Wisconsin down into, we thought, Florida. And so if you've seen the images of somebody in an ultralight aircraft in a costume with cranes following behind, we were part of that. And that was to establish this population. That program disbanded about a decade ago now because we had enough adult cranes in the wild that we've started just putting this year's chicks near the adults that have been out in the wild for a couple years, and those adults teach this year's chicks the migration route. So it's a lot more efficient use of resources, and while we are good at pretending to be cranes, the cranes are better at craning, right? So it's been fairly successful, and so that's that reintroduced population. Over the years, we also tried to reestablish a Florida population. So that's here. That population's no more. We're not adding to it. And then we established a non-migratory population in Louisiana. So again, a lot of creative thinking. Like I said, we wanted this eastern population initially to go to Florida. It turns out they like Alabama, Arkansas, Indiana better, and it's working. So they're surviving the winter, they're coming back to the Wisconsin area and breeding. So we're starting to see that population have offspring each year, which is great.
Where did it go in Indiana?
Jasper Pulaski, I believe. I'm not as familiar with their stopping points beyond general, yeah. So, yeah.
The hunting that is endangering?
Yes.
Is it recreational hunting or is it food?
That's a great question. So the hunting, so within the whooping crane, there is no hunting season. They are an endangered species. They are protected at the state and federal level. So we do have poaching of them, and it's when they get in typically to an agricultural area. And so unfortunately we had several poached earlier this year near crayfish farms in the south. We haven't necessarily seen like people thought it was a sandhill, so kind of two separate things there. There are several states that do have a sandhill crane hunt season, and yet typically it's more of a sport. There are some people that consume the crane, but I don't believe there's a ton of meat on them that you would consume. So it's kind of like any other smallish game bird. But yeah, for the most part, just sport. And then this is slightly out of date now that I look at it. But we now have about 850 whooping cranes. There is about 70 in the eastern migratory population, which is the one that we have here in Wisconsin for part of the year. There's about 80 in that non-migratory population of Louisiana, about 550 in the Aransas wood buffalo. That's the highly migratory population that goes from Canada to Texas, and about 140 or so in human care. So we're trending up. The eastern migratory population and the Louisiana non-migratory population are not currently self-sustaining. So that means that human intervention is needed on an annual basis in order to get those populations to continue to increase. They're not reproducing enough to replace on their own. The population in red, that wild population, that one is self-sustaining and continuing to grow, which is a great sign. So those cranes in human care, we had to get creative, and we have learned a lot over the 53 years of ICF's history at this point. And so we have several ways of raising cranes at this point that we plan to release. So cranes, the first large moving object they see, that's what they believe is mom or dad. That is how they learn what species they are. And so what that means is that first large moving object they see, when it's time for them to raise a family, that's what they look for. It's called imprinting. And so we have two methods to make sure that they imprint as a whooping crane and not a human. Early on, we would be like, oh, well, if we take the egg, it hatches, we raise the chick, we can put it in the wild, it'll be fine. No, because when that crane wanted to then raise a family, it would seek out a human. Not ideal. And so we have two ways. We have mom and dad whooping crane that are raising a chick. That's a great way. They learn everything they need to know from those parents. And most of the time, the cranes are pretty good at being parents. The second way is costume rearing. So once we figured out the whole imprinting thing, and there's been some famous examples of that over the years that if we have a little time at the end, I can talk about. Once we figured out imprinting, we figured, well, that means we have to dress as a whooping crane. And so we have staff members who that's been a primary focus of their job for the better part of their career. So it's a full costume, and I'll have more pictures later on, but it's basically if you picture a white ghost costume with big rubber boots, because you're standing in a wetland, right, being a crane. And then on your hand, you will have some sort of puppet. This is the education version. The real thing is a little bit more detailed. But the staff will have a puppet, and they will pretend to be a whooping crane. They have an audio device to make sure all the vocals are the right calls, because there's a whole variety of calls. And so the first little bit, they are raised by puppet. This is how they learn. They are a whooping crane. We actually have puppets for all 15 species at this point. So they learn they're a whooping crane. They start to learn what food looks like, how to forage, what to find, all those skills. We now also typically will put one of the pairs that live at ICF year-round out near the chicks, separate but near, so that those adults can model behaviors as well, even when our staff is not around. So all of that helps them learn, and I can pass this around so you can try being a whooping crane parent. All of that kind of helps these chicks learn what to do. And so that's how we were successful, is we would raise them one of two ways. In the fall every year, we take all the chicks and we take them to a very wild area, typically one of the National Wildlife Refuge. We take the whole flock of chicks near where we know there's adult whooping cranes, and we start to let them out and explore, and they come back every night. They'll start to hang out with those wild whooping cranes, and eventually they'll decide it's time to go, and the group will start their migration with those juveniles following those adults that already know the way. This year, you can see here's another example of that cute little chick. So this year we'll have several that are going up to the refuge. Like I said, typically September, October. And it's a pretty exciting time when we do it. It's a little nerve-wracking. But we've banded nearly every crane that spends part of the year in Wisconsin, like whooping crane, except for like a couple. So we can follow them over their lifetime and learn causes of death, or who is breeding with who, or where each bird spends its breeding season, all the different things. And one thing that we noticed is a big problem when it comes to parents successfully raising chicks, and that first year or so of survival, is those natural predators. So we're starting to look at how can we teach these crane chicks that we're raising by costume or at ICF to recognize those threats. And so again, we're always learning and tweaking and modifying our approach. And so that's kind of one of the things we're working on now. Another big thing is recognizing power lines for these birds when they're in flight. The power lines are very hard for birds to see until the last minute. The bird goes to turn and avoid the power line. They close the circuit when both wings touch the two lines, and they get electrocuted. And so there's also techniques that we're working on with the electrical companies to make them more visible to cranes. So if you've been driving around near a lot of farm fields and seen things hanging from the power lines, these are flight diverters to help those big birds see the power lines with more notice to reduce how often those collisions happen. The electrical companies are happy to work with us because it's not good for them and their equipment. It's not good for the birds, the customers, and so it's an all-around win when we can mark those power lines that are in more problematic areas right near those wetlands and grasslands that the birds are using a lot. So again, constantly evaluating, we're actively studying the species. And the good news is what we're learning from the whooping crane and sandhill crane here in North America, we're then applying to our efforts elsewhere in the world. So then this is a couple of our staff hanging out with the cohort of chicks. So this was from a couple years ago, but you can see when I said kind of a white ghost costume. Now, can the cranes, can they see it is like not an actual crane? Yes, but it's close enough. It does the trick, it hides the overall body shape, and when they're an adult, they know to look for a whooping crane and not a person. And that's what matters. They're looking for the right thing to have a chick with. So this is, like I said, somebody's job. They spend all day hanging out, pretending to be a crane, raising chicks. And we got really good at it. And it's cool because you can also use this with other similar birds, not just cranes.
So normally a crane chick would be an only child.
Correct.
Have you found that there are differences in cranes that are raised communally like this, like in the wild, than when they
Yeah.
have their own family?
I have not heard of anything significant. I haven't specifically asked our staff that work on this project that question, though. But one thing to remember is that typically in the fall, these birds group up to some degree prior to migration. So it's typically you're not going to have this many whooping cranes in a single spot, so it's definitely a larger flock than is naturally found. But it's not uncommon for them to be around a ton of sandhills or kind of in a flock of cranes. Okay. So all the cinnamon colored ones would be probably about 3 months old or so. By the time they're out in a wetland like this, it's typically September, October. So they're several months old, they're nearly full grown. They're not quite fledged yet, it looks like in this picture. But they're going to be starting to spread those wings. They'll be running, flapping, starting to get that lift, figure out how to maneuver it all. And so, yeah, just learning all the tips and tricks and whatnot. And our staff are really good at pretending to be cranes. So.
If they don't know how to do it, they just wing it, right?
Exactly. Yep. So, but yeah, and it kind of goes back to that creative thinking. I mentioned earlier that George is still a very active part in the organization, and he loves to hear like our big ideas and kind of what we can do next to help these birds. With 10 of the 15 being threatened or endangered, there's a lot of work and opportunity for us to help these species out. So, with that, I have 2 upcoming events. We have Member Appreciation Day, which is the last Saturday of September, and Great Midwest Crane Fest, November 14th and 15th. Both of those events are big days. We have a lot going on, a lot of speakers. They're a fantastic time to come out. But we are open May 1st through October 1st. Every year we do tours every Saturday and Sunday the entire season. And then we do tours June 1st through Labor Day, 3 times a day during the height of the summer. So a lot is going on. I would recommend checking our website for the most current information. But I would love to hang out with you, hear your crane stories. We are a nonprofit, so we do everything that we do because of people like you. Whether that's through visiting us, becoming a member, telling your friends and family about the Crane Foundation or your crane stories and helping us spread awareness. It's truly because of programs like this that we're able to have that big reach. So, what questions do you have for me? That was a very fast around the world. For the whooping crane, yeah, most years. It ebbs and flows. And so there's some years that we have strong hatching, and then other years that we have almost no reproduction. But that number is the last few years has been pretty consistently right around that 70 bird mark for the eastern migratory population. Yep. And that's the one that goes Wisconsin to the southern U.S. The wood buffalo Aransas population, that one is inching up. And so that's one that we don't do surveys every year at this point just because it is so resource heavy. Where they nest, there are no roads per se, so it's all done by air. And so you have to like rent a plane and like get staff up there, and so every couple of years they'll do a survey, and the indicators are that they're starting to spread out a little bit and that there is decent nesting and eggs every year. So we are hopeful at this point. And like I said, my count was slightly off. We're closer to that 850, 875 count based on the latest survey.
So the green, that's in the winter time, they probably don't go way north.
No, so green is breeding
That's
and orange is winter. So the orange is way down here.
in the winter time.
Yep. And we, ICF just purchased about 1,200 acres of property along the Texas Gulf Coast. That is known whooping crane wintering grounds to help kind of provide that sanctuary space of critical habitat for them. So we, own property now down there, and I think it'd be really fun to go. Our teams, our scientists down there are just now like doing a diversity survey and figuring out what species are on the property during what season, if there's any non-natives that need to be removed, or how do we make it, restore it as much as possible to the classic habitat.
A non-native means they're crane that doesn't belong to the
No, it's a lot of like the wetland grasses and plants and like invertebrates and stuff that can cause problems, or if you have the wrong plants, they can take over a wetland very fast. And that makes it hard for the cranes to be able to find the crayfish and the crabs and the crustaceans that is critical for their winter diet. Any other questions? Yeah.
When you talk about the education in China.
Yes.
Okay. I know that when my children were in grade school, I think it was the fourth grade,
Yeah.
always went to their group. Is that continuing? Is that very strong in the schools?
Locally, we're seeing a decrease in elementary school students being able to go on field trips and come to places like the Crane Foundation. If you have a school group that wants to come, we are really affordable. Our student rate right now is $2 a student. Transportation is very challenging for a lot of school districts, and being able to have the kids be away for a good chunk of the day is challenging. So we still see about 2,000 school kids a year, so that's pretty solid. We see about 23,000 visitors a year in total. So a good chunk of that, particularly in May, school group chaos, the end of season, or end of school year field trips, right? But what I'm hearing from teachers is that there's a lot of barriers that prevent them from going on a lot of field trips the way they used to. And that varies district to district, of course, but yeah, we do also have some really good relationships where I'm able to go into the school. So if they're not able to come to the Crane Foundation and see all the birds in person, we have a whole lot of very active like game style learning about cranes, where we play like a migration tag game, or we play crane charades where we all act out different crane behaviors and try to figure out what the crane's body language is telling us, right? So there's ways that we can kind of work with different schools and their needs, but yeah.
So I took a picture of a sandhill crane and got a really good side view of its beak.
Yep.
I could see through it.
Yes.
So it's like they keep their mouth open, or what is
No.
that for?
That's the nair. So this is a crane beak. It's a replica.
Yeah.
So they are an animal that has a lot of predators, so their eyeballs are on the side of their head, so they can keep a good look around of anything that might be going on in the habitat. But yeah, there's typically some big nairs or nostrils right through here. And yeah, if it lines up perfectly, you can see right through them. Typically, this is not all nair. It's a little bit smaller, but yeah. You are welcome to pass this around as well. Be gentle with it, because even though it's a replica, it's still fragile. But yeah, you can see that their beak is kind of medium length, so that's why they're a good mixture of grassland and wetland throughout their day. Any other questions? Yeah.
So we start seeing this
No, not really. So there's a lot of kind of biology behind it. And there are cranes that are cold sensitive and cranes that are not. So like the African cranes, they are cold sensitive. They're in Baraboo, when it drops below, about 35, we're looking at shifting those cranes indoors because their biology is a little bit different. But our native species, the blood vessels that run through, they have countercurrent circulation that allows that heat to distribute in a way where they're not as likely to get frostbite as you or I. Their feet are designed differently. So could they get frostbite or have cold sensitivities? Yeah, but not likely. And they really do time their migration to also be aware of the seasonal weather. So that big migration that I talked about in Nebraska, the Platte River, there's been a few years where we'll see some of those cranes start to shift north, but then a huge cold front will come in and the weather will shift, maybe blizzards. They'll come back to the Platte River where there's that good water, that good food bank in the fields surrounding the river, and they'll hang out there for a few extra days, re-fatten up, get the calories they need, and then continue their journey north. These birds migrate mainly in response to food availability, and so that's why there's variation year over year of when exactly they arrive back or when they take off for the year, all about what food is available in the neighborhood. The whooping crane and the Siberian crane are more cold hardy than some of the other species. So they typically can be out and about for longer parts of the year than our others.
Do you have a census on how many cranes there are in Wisconsin in the summertime?
The question is there a census for how many cranes are here in the summer? Not a good one at this point. The population is quite large, and so kind of the estimates are all over and have a huge range. I haven't been able to find a really good estimate, but they're always moving, it's shifting, but we know the population is continuing to increase and that it's stable, and so we're not concerned. Yeah. The North American estimate is at just over 1 million birds. And that's several subspecies and several kind of different migratory flocks, but on a whole, they are doing well. Yeah.
With the states that have legal hunting,
Mm-hmm.
do you see that impact the overall population of the birds, or does it's still kind of stable even with those states?
Yeah, so the population on a whole is large enough that it's not going to have a significant impact on the population. I will mention that the states that I'm familiar with that have a hunt are typically in areas where the population is not breeding as much. There's some of the more non-migratory, whereas we have a very heavy proportion of the breeding population, right? They come up here, have their chicks, raise their family, and then they head back south. So it's not a direct comparison, but yeah, it's definitely something where if you go on our website, we do get a lot of questions about it, and we do have some articles around kind of that proposed legislation or kind of the different hunts out there. So we're monitoring. Yeah. Go for it.
Is there anything that looks anything like a whooping crane other than a whooping crane? I mean, could you possibly misidentify one if it was like?
That's a great question. So one of the things that, particularly in the south, where these birds winter and we have those non-migratory populations, and here in Wisconsin, is we actually do work a lot with the hunter safety classes and making sure that anyone that is out hunting knows what they're shooting and how to ID stuff. And I'll have these up here when I'm done if you want to come get one. But it's a nice little water bird ID guide, and it kind of shows you the different big white and black birds. I think it'd be really hard to mistake one, but there is, they're long legs, there's long necks on some of the big birds, and there's black wingtips on some that overlap. And so we have found that this has been helpful for people just to help assure them that what they're seeing. Backlighting is also really hard with some of these big birds. Depending on where the sun is, it can really change the appearance of the coloration of the feathers. And so, yeah, like white pelican, I know you're kind of like thinking here, like, oh, that doesn't make sense. But with backlighting and like a flight pattern and angle, they're a big bird, white main body, black wingtips. There is overlap there. So, yeah, definitely something to come get. I can hand it to you, and you can kind of check that out. But we have found that helpful for those hunter safety classes that we show up to talk about. That, yeah. Okay, well, I've gone a little bit over time, and the library closes in 25 minutes. So I will end it, but again, I do want to thank you for coming and chatting, and I would love to see all of you come up to Baraboo and see our beautiful site. But I'll hang out here for a few more minutes too if you have any questions or want to share crane stories. I'm always happy to hear them. So thank you.
My name's Miguel.